Hey everybody out there, this is Seto, and in today's video, guys, I guess you could say this is going to be a continuation to some degree about the topic we discussed last time in my last video, which was I talked about the importance and why it's still important to learn hand advantage, field presence, hand and field presence, excuse me, minusing and plussing, and why they're still relevant and important in today's game to gear towards who's going to win the duel, how to use your duel, why they're important to lower tier decks more than higher tier decks, and things of that nature. That's what I made that video about, and why I found that it was important to still talk about, because that set the foundation down to talk about today's video, which is something that I have, for the most part, actually been watching and paying attention and actually taking notes down, by the way, over the course of probably the last month before the ban list came out. So what is today's video going to be about? Pushes and counter pushes. This is a video I've wanted to make for quite some time now. It's something that I kind of noticed more and more, and I started playing on DN and Duel Network, and I started playing and watching my games in real life and watching others play, and it's something I kind of found very interesting. It didn't really matter on the deck, so to speak, but it did matter to some degree, depending upon the deck, I guess you could say, but not always. Not always. So, what does that mean? So, in a game of Yu-Gi-Oh!, usually to get your opponent's life points down to 0, you have to make a push. You have to invest your hand resources, your hand advantage, onto the field, make a board presence strong enough to overcome your opponent. Usually you'll make a couple big monsters, try to keep advantage in your hand or on the field, and make a push over your opponent's monsters or field to drop their life points down to 0. Because at the end of the day, the objective is to most duels or most decks is to get the opponent's life points down to 0. So that's usually what happens. But in the course of a duel, usually you'll see a couple of things. You'll see a push by one of the players. He will make the first push to try to overcome his opponent's resources, and then you'll see it usually if the other opponent has not bricked or has a decent to good hand, he'll try to make a counter push or stop that opponent's push, make his own push, a counter push, to defeat his opponent. And sometimes you also see where in a good duel, I guess you could say, in a good, back and forth type of duel, the other player 1 who made the first push will stop the player 2 who made the counter push his play and make his own counter push again. And usually that means he wins the duel. Not always is that true. So let's go into more detail now. Sorry if that was a little complex. So, watching all these duels and taking notes on them, mental notes and physical notes literally, I noticed something. Usually, about I guess you could say 75 to 80% of the time, I noticed that the player that made the first push, so player 1 who makes the first initial push to the opponent, player 2, lost the duel. You may say, why? Why is that? Player 2, usually the person that made the counter push, won the duel, actually, I noticed. Not always, but like I said, a good chunk of the time I noticed this was true. Why is this so? Why is this something I've noticed? Well, I read an article about it, pushes and counter pushes, an old article, by the way, and I started to do some investigation to see if this article was still relevant to today's game, and I found out that it was very true. So, what the article stated, and what I found to be true as well, is that the first player, and in today's game, most decks are made to be offensive, quote unquote, not defensive like maybe a Gravekeeper deck, which I love. They're more aggro, they're made to go on the offensive. And if player 1 goes first, makes the first push, and uses up all his resources, which resources are still to this day in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Important, because if you've used up all your resources, you're not going to have nothing to stop your opponent. You see where I'm going with this, maybe? So if player 1 makes his push, and player 2 stops that in some way, shape, or fashion, maybe he'll take a lot of life points, but he's got a card in his hand, maybe like Regeki, to make a momentum swinger, and counter push his opponent back into the grave. So if player 1's push is initially stopped, say he makes Quasar, for example, and the guy, stops it in some way, shape, or form by solemn warning it, the guy has used up all his advantage. He's gonna have nothing really left to stop his opponent from going off and attacking him and finishing him off. So when he's doing this, player 1's made this push, used up his resources. Player 2 still has most of his resources. Yes, he maybe had to use 1 or 2 cards to get over his opponent's field and clear it up, but usually what he'll do is he'll make the counter push. And because player 1's used up all his most of his resources, if he doesn't have good trap cards or good something like that, which a lot of decks nowadays, they're not all of them, but a good majority of decks nowadays, they're mostly made for offensive play. So they've used up all their, I guess you could say, gasoline or stuff to to go on the offensive, and they've used up all their, I guess you could say, resources. Player 2's not going to have much to overcome, and if he's constantly, maybe for 2 turns, made his field, made his second push, smacking his opponent's life points are going to be down low enough, and he's still gaining advantage. Drawing cards, searching cards maybe. Player 1's not going to have that much resources, and he's going to have to rely upon drawing cards and stuff like that, and maybe he's able to make a counter push to overcome his opponent, so player 1 can make another counter push to overcome his opponent sometimes. But he's going to have so low of life points from player 2 maybe smacking him in the face, as he's trying to gain advantage again to overcome his opponent, that by the time he does, he's going to have low life points. And usually that means that either 1, he's already lost the duel, or number 2, he's low on life points, and he's in Cowboy range, or Heartland Drago range, or Burn Damage range, or just whatever it could be, to being defeated. And so one good solid push pushes player 2 over the edge to win the duel. It's something I've noticed, and I think it's something that you as players out there, if you play the game, should maybe look at a little bit more when you play games and when you watch your opponent. Now, like I said before, it's not always true, but it is something in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! You do notice. People in most decks nowadays are offensively geared. Pendulums are offensively geared. Whatever deck is out there nowadays, most of the time is offensively geared. It's not so reliant on traps as decks used to be back in the day. So if they've expended all their gasoline into attacking, when that person makes the counter attack, it's going to be much more easier to overcome. Granted, floodgates are a thing. Vanity, skill drain, things like that can easily stop a counter push from player 2, but usually, most scenarios, in a good duel, you're going to see this. That's why I discussed in last video I did about why it's important that field and hand advantage are so important. Because while player 1's expended all of his things onto the field and done everything he's done, he may not have the resources to stop that counter push made by player 2. And if he doesn't, it's going to be an uphill battle from there because he's expended so much of his resources already. That's why things like Regeki were so powerful back in the day, and still to some days today can be, because it's a momentum swinger. Granted, like I said, I'm doing this after, before the ban list of July, so I don't know what happened to Regeki or whatever. If it got banned, I doubt it, but whatever. What I'm trying to say is it's a momentum swinger. That's why Regeki's been such a powerful card, even though people said originally that it wasn't because everything floats nowadays. It's a momentum swinger. It can stop that push and cause you to go off and maybe inflict the last damage you need to in a counter push strategy, or just overcome your opponent. So that's why, and I apologize guys, I'm actually in a rocking chair right now, so that's why you keep seeing me rocking back and forth, but it's just some good food for thought, I think, guys, that something we could talk about and discuss about pushes and counter pushes, and how usually I find sometimes, not always mind you, like I said, the player that makes the counter push usually wins the duel. Not always, but I see that it's true. And even from my personal playing style, I've noticed it, and I tried it out. I said, okay, I'll let my opponent go off, then I'll make a counter push. Sometimes a good chunk of the time I won the duel, but if I went first, my opponent would have a response. He responded to it, then he would go off, and then he would, because I've used up my resources, he would win the duel. So, just some food for thought. Sometimes a good rule of thumb is to maybe, I guess you could say, find a balance. Don't invest everything onto the field. Don't, go into one grandiose assault and, storm the citadel. Maybe piecemeal it out, your attacks. Don't just go for one, put all your eggs into one basket, so to speak, as my grandfather and my father always used to tell me. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, because you never know what's going to happen. Have a backup plan. Have a plan B in case plan A fails. Always something to keep in mind. And until next time, guys, take care. Have fun dueling. Good luck dueling. Tell me what you think of this, these things I've talked about in this video. And until next time, tongue-tied today, guys. I apologize. And until next time, guys, take care. Have fun dueling. Good luck dueling. And I'll see all of you guys next time. Seto Kaiba, I'm out of here, guys, till next time. And good luck dueling to all of you. Take care, everybody.